A journalist is fired live on the air. When he found out why, he shouted and exclaimed, "Hello, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any stories." The sun was setting over New York City, casting long shadows across Manhattan skyscrapers. On the 32nd floor of one of these imposing buildings, Michael Reeves, a 42-year-old journalist, looked out of the window of his office at the global news network, GNN, gazing at the burning skyline. His eyes, tired but still burning with determination, reflected the orange glow of the sky, as if absorbing the last light of day to fuel his tireless search for the truth. Michael ran a hand through his gray hair, an early sign of the years of stress and sleepless nights devoted to his profession. His face, marked by expression lines that told stories of countless scoops and editorial battles, was tense. He knew that the storm that had been brewing for months was about to come crashing down on him. The phone on his desk rang, breaking the silence. It was Sarah, his longtime assistant. "Mike, the boss wants to see you. Now." He sighed deeply, straightened his tie, and headed for the office of Robert Caldwell, the CEO of GNN. As he entered, Michael felt the weight of the gazes of Caldwell and the board members. The air was charged with tension. "Michael," began Caldwell, his voice deep and controlled, "you know why you're here?" It wasn't a question. Michael nodded silently, standing his ground. "Your latest report on corruption in Senator Thompson's office has crossed every line. We're facing threats of prosecution, pressure from advertisers, and the senator is demanding a full retraction." Michael felt his blood boil. "Bob, every word of that report is true. We have sources, documents, recordings." "Enough," Caldwell slammed the table. "It's not just about truth, Michael. It's about survival. GNN can't afford to make such powerful enemies." One of the board members, a middle-aged woman in an impeccable suit, intervened. "Mr. Reeves, we understand your commitment to investigative journalism, but you need to understand that we live in complicated times. The line between reporting and activism is increasingly blurred." Michael looked at each of them in disbelief. "So that's it? We're going to bow to pressure and ignore our duty to inform the public?" Caldwell sighed heavily. "Michael, you're fired, effective immediately." The words fell like a hammer, echoing in the silent room. Michael felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. 20 years of career, countless awards and recognitions, all reduced to nothing in an instant. Without saying a word, he turned and left the room, ignoring the looks of pity from his colleagues as he walked back to his office. Sarah was waiting for him, tears in her eyes. "Mike, I'm so sorry." He made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Don't worry, Sarah. It doesn't end here." As Michael collected his belongings, his cell phone vibrated incessantly. The news of his dismissal had already leaked, and social media was in an uproar. Journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens were expressing their outrage, turning "Shiki Stand with Reeves" into one of the most popular hashtags of the moment. Outside the GNN building, a crowd was beginning to form. Impromptu placards demanded freedom of the press, and the truth must not be silenced. Michael watched the scene from a cab, his heart divided between gratitude for the support and concern about where things were going. At home, he turned on the TV, flipping through the news channels. His dismissal was the talk of the hour, with experts debating the implications for press freedom in the country. "What we're seeing is a direct attack on journalistic integrity," said a commentator on CNN. "When journalists are punished for doing their job, we all lose." Another channel showed Senator Thompson at a press conference, vehemently denying the accusations and threatening to sue Michael and GNN for defamation. Michael's phone kept ringing. Colleagues, sources, even politicians he'd investigated in the past, all wanting to know his side of the story. But it was a text message that really caught his attention. "Reeves, we need to talk. I have information that will make your reporting look like child's play. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park. Come alone." The message was from an unknown number, but Michael recognized the style. It was one of his most trusted sources in the government, someone who had always helped him unearth the truth, no matter how ugly. As the evening progressed, Michael reflected on the day's events. His career, built on the pillars of integrity and the search for the truth, seemed to be crumbling. But something inside him refused to accept defeat. This wasn't just a fight for his job or his reputation. It was a battle for the soul of American journalism. Looking out the window of his Brooklyn apartment, Michael watched the lights of the city that never sleeps. Somewhere out there, the truth was waiting to be discovered, and he was determined to find it, no matter the cost. With one last look at the city he loved so much, Michael made a silent promise to himself and to everyone who still believed in the power of the free press. This was just the beginning. The real story was yet to come, and he would be there to tell it, with or without GNN's support. The clock struck 23:59 when Michael finally went to bed, exhausted but resolute. Tomorrow would be a new day, the first of a new battle, and he was ready to fight. The sun had barely risen when Michael Reeves arrived at Riverside Park. The fresh morning air carried the scent of the Hudson River and the distant murmur of Manhattan traffic. He sat on a worn wooden bench, watching the first morning joggers pass by, oblivious to the drama unfolding in his life. At 10 a.m. sharp, a hooded figure approached. It was Claire Donovan, a high-ranking Justice Department official and one of Michael's most trusted sources. "Mike, the situation is worse than we imagined," Claire said in a low voice, nervously looking around. "They're preparing an arrest warrant for you." Michael felt his stomach sink. "Arrest? On what grounds?" "Allegations of financial crimes and corruption. They're saying you took bribes in exchange for burying certain stories." Disbelief gave way to anger. "That's absurd. You know I would never do that." Claire nodded. "I know, Mike, but they have evidence. Bank transactions, emails, even audio recordings. It all sounds very convincing." "Fabricated evidence," Michael muttered, his mind racing. "Who's behind it?" "I'm not sure, but it goes beyond Senator Thompson. It involves people in the highest echelons of government. Mike, you've stirred up a hornet's nest." Before Michael could reply, his phone vibrated. It was an urgent news notification. Journalist Michael Reeves charged with corruption and financial crimes. The world seemed to spin around him. In a matter of minutes, his life was about to fall completely apart. "Go home, Mike. Get ready. They'll be after you soon," Claire warned, quickly disappearing between the trees in the park. Michael barely made it home before his phone exploded with calls and messages. Colleagues, friends, even his ex-wife, all wanting to know if the accusations were true. He turned on the TV to see Sarah Jameson, his former GNN colleague, reporting live from outside his apartment. Sources close to the investigation allege that renowned journalist Michael Reeves allegedly accepted bribes in exchange for suppressing compromising stories about prominent political figures. Authorities claim to have substantial evidence, including suspicious bank transactions and compromising communications. Michael turned off the TV, feeling nauseous. He knew he was innocent, but how could he prove it against apparently solid evidence? His phone rang again. It was Ethan Winters, his lawyer and longtime friend. "Mike, don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way. We have to prepare for the worst." While he waited, Michael frantically rummaged through his files, looking for anything that might help prove his innocence. Years of notes, recordings, and confidential documents passed through his hands, each one representing a story he had told, a truth he had revealed. The doorbell rang, making him jump. It was Ethan, looking grave and worried. "Mike, the situation is critical. They have a warrant for your arrest. We need to act fast." They barely had time to discuss strategies when loud knocks echoed through the door. "Michael Reeves, this is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door." Michael and Ethan exchanged glances. This was the moment that would define everything. "I'll open it," Michael said, taking a deep breath. "Ethan, no matter what happens, keep investigating. The truth is out there." When the door opened, Michael was immediately surrounded by FBI agents. The cold handcuffs on his wrists seemed to seal his fate. As he was escorted out, a crowd of reporters and onlookers crowded into the street. Camera flashes exploded like lightning, capturing the moment when one of the country's most respected journalists was taken away like a common criminal. In the police car, Michael watched the streets of New York go by in a blur. His mind was in turmoil, full of unanswered questions. Who was behind this? How had such convincing false evidence been fabricated? And most importantly, how would he prove his innocence? At the police station, the registration process was a surreal experience. Fingerprints, photography, confiscation of personal belongings. Each step seemed to take him further away from his previous life. While waiting in a holding cell, Michael heard snippets of police conversations. "Can you believe it? Reeves always seemed so upstanding. Go figure, man. Sometimes the ones who look the cleanest are the dirtiest." These words hit him like a punch in the gut. Years of building a reputation for integrity, and now everything was in danger of falling apart. Hours passed before Ethan finally managed to see him. "Mike, I managed to schedule a bail hearing for tomorrow, but I'm not going to lie. Things don't look good. The evidence they have is impressive." Michael leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "Ethan, you have to listen to me. This is a setup. Someone wants to shut me up, and they've gone to great lengths to do it." Ethan nodded slowly. "I believe you, Mike, but proving it is going to be the battle of our lives." When Ethan left, Michael found himself alone with his thoughts. The walls of the cell seemed to close in on him, a physical reminder of how much his freedom, both literal and journalistic, was under threat. As the night wore on, Michael reflected on his career, on all the stories he had told, and the truths he had revealed. Now, ironically, he found himself at the center of a story that seemed to come out of his own investigations. Outside, the city that never sleeps continued its frenetic pace. In newsrooms, on social media, in bars and cafes, people debated furiously. Michael Reeves, fallen hero or victim of a conspiracy? In his empty apartment, Michael's computer blinked silently. On it, hidden in layers of encryption, was the beginning of an investigation that could shake the structures of power. An investigation that now risked never seeing the light of day. As the first rays of sunlight penetrated through the bars of his cell, Michael made a silent promise. He would find the truth, no matter what the cost, because if he didn't, who else would have the courage to do it? The battle for the truth was just beginning, and Michael Reeves was determined to fight to the end. Global News Network's main studio was in tense silence that morning. The bright lights and ready cameras contrasted with the grim faces of the journalists and technical staff. It was time for the morning news, and everyone knew that this would be no ordinary day. Jessica Lawson, the main anchor of GNN Morning, adjusted her microphone and looked directly into the camera. Her normally composed face betrayed a mixture of emotions, shock, sadness, and a hint of restrained anger. "Good morning, America. Today, we begin our program with news we never imagined we'd have to report." She paused, visibly struggling to keep her composure. Our colleague and friend, Michael Reeves, was arrested last night on charges of corruption and financial crimes. Social media instantly exploded. Free Reeves and journalism under attack became trending topics within minutes. Jessica continued, her voice shaking slightly. As many of you know, Michael has been a tireless voice for truth and transparency in our profession. These accusations, well, they're hard to believe for those of us who know him. Backstage, executive producer Tom Hansen watched the broadcast with a mixture of pride and apprehension. He knew Jessica was taking a risk by showing such open support for Michael, but he also knew it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, on the streets of New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and other major cities, crowds were beginning to form spontaneously. Impromptu placards demanded freedom for Reeves and protect our journalists. Back in the studio, Jessica was interviewing Alan Prescott, a renowned civil rights lawyer. Mr. Prescott, what do these charges and this arrest mean for press freedom in our country? Prescott adjusted his glasses, his face grave. Jessica, this is nothing less than a direct attack on the heart of our democracy. When journalists are silenced, whether by dismissal or imprisonment, we all lose. It's a dark day for America. In newsrooms across the country, journalists watched the coverage with a mixture of horror and determination. Many began wearing black brooches in solidarity with Michael. In Washington, D.C., veteran reporter Diane Chen was broadcasting live outside the Capitol. The arrest of Michael Reeves has sent shockwaves throughout the journalism community, she reported, her voice steady despite the obvious emotion. Congressmen from both parties are demanding an investigation into the circumstances of his arrest. The question everyone is asking is this justice or persecution? On social media, journalists around the world began sharing their own stories of intimidation and censorship using the hashtag #IStandWithReeves. It was a moment of unprecedented unity in the global journalistic community. In prison, Michael Reeves was told about the public reaction by his lawyer, Ethan Winters. "Mike, you won't believe what's happening out there," Ethan said, his eyes shining with a mixture of hope and concern. "It's like the whole country has woken up to the importance of free journalism." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, feeling a surge of emotion. "Ethan, this is bigger than me. It's about what we do, why we do it. If my situation can shed light on this struggle, then maybe it's worth it." Meanwhile, at GNN headquarters, an emergency meeting was underway. Robert Caldwell, the CEO, faced a room full of angry executives and editors. "How could we let this happen?" shouted Sarah Thompson, editor-in-chief of Investigations. "Michael was the best of us and we threw him to the wolves." Caldwell looked years older, the weight of his decisions clearly visible on his face. I made a mistake. I thought we were protecting the network, but in fact, we betrayed everything we stood for." The meeting was interrupted by an urgent knock on the door. It was Tom Hansen, the executive producer. "You need to see this," he said, turning on the TV on the wall. On the screen, tens of thousands of people were marching in Washington, D.C., New York, and other major cities. Posters demanded truth and justice and free the press. It was an unprecedented show of support. The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Caldwell spoke, his voice breaking. "We need to fix this, now." As the day progressed, the story continued to unfold in real time. Journalists from all over the country began investigating the charges against Michael, determined to uncover the truth behind his arrest. In a small cafe in Brooklyn, Claire Donovan, Michael's source in the Justice Department, met secretly with Ethan Winters. "I've got something," she whispered, sliding a flash drive across the table. Encrypted emails suggesting that Michael's arrest was orchestrated at the highest levels of the government. This could be the key to freeing him. Ethan picked up the flash drive, his heart racing. "Claire, this is huge, but how are we going to get it out without putting you at risk?" Claire smiled sadly. "Sometimes you have to risk everything for the truth. Isn't that what Michael taught us?" As the sun set over a nation in turmoil, the fight for the truth and freedom of the press continued. In his cell, Michael Reeves gazed out of the small window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time since his arrest, he felt a spark of hope. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: the spirit of free and courageous journalism that Michael had always defended was more alive than ever. And as long as that spirit endured, there was hope for the truth, for justice, and for the future of American democracy. The federal courthouse for the Southern District of New York was an imposing building of marble and glass, its facade reflecting the morning sun. Inside, in the austere corridors, the buzz of lawyers, journalists, and onlookers created a tense atmosphere. It was the day of Michael Reeves' first hearing, and the world was watching with bated breath. Ethan Winters, Michael's lawyer, adjusted his tie as he waited in the lobby. His tired eyes showed a night spent preparing his friend and client's defense. Next to him, Jessica Lawson, the GNN anchor, whispered, "Ethan, how are things?" "Complicated, Jess," Ethan replied, his voice low. "The charges are serious, and the evidence seems solid, but we know there's something wrong here. Michael is innocent." Jessica nodded, her eyes reflecting a mixture of concern and determination. "The whole country is watching, Ethan. It's not just about Michael now. It's about the future of journalism." Inside the courtroom, Michael Reeves sat next to Ethan, his face a mask of forced calm. Judge Arthur Holloway, known for his strict impartiality, entered the room, instantly silencing the murmur of the crowd. "We are here today for the preliminary hearing in the case of the United States versus Michael Reeves," Judge Holloway announced, his deep voice echoing through the room. "Mr. Winters, how does your client plead?" Ethan stood up, his posture firm. "Not guilty, Your Honor. My client vehemently denies all charges." The prosecutor, Sarah Blackwell, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, then stood up. "Your Honor, the state has substantial evidence of financial crimes and corruption committed by Mr. Reeves. We request that bail be denied, given the seriousness of the charges." Ethan quickly countered, "Your Honor, my client is a respected journalist with no criminal record. He is not a flight risk and has deep ties to the community. We request that he be released on bail." Judge Holloway pondered for a moment before speaking. "Given the nature of the charges and the public profile of the accused, I set bail at $1 million. In addition, Mr. Reeves will be required to surrender his passport and wear an electronic ankle bracelet." A murmur went through the room. It was a high amount, but not impossible. Michael felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He might be out of prison, but the battle had only just begun. In the days that followed, the Reeves case dominated the headlines. Legal experts debated incessantly on TV and social media. The Reeves case raises crucial questions about freedom of the press and due process of law, commented constitutional law professor Dr. Alan Roth in an interview with CNN. The presumption of innocence is a fundamental pillar of our judicial system, but we must also consider the seriousness of the charges. Meanwhile, Ethan and his team worked tirelessly, examining every detail of the evidence presented by the prosecution. "Something doesn't add up," Ethan muttered, looking at a pile of financial documents. "These transactions, they look authentic, but there are subtle inconsistencies." Claire Donovan, Michael's anonymous source at the Justice Department, ventured out once again to meet with Ethan. "The orders to fabricate this evidence came from above," she whispered, sliding an envelope under the table. "But they were careful. There are no digital traces." The pressure of public opinion continued to grow. Demonstrations in support of Michael took place daily in front of the courthouse and GNN headquarters. Posters reading "Freedom for Reeves" and "The truth cannot be silenced" became ubiquitous. At GNN, Robert Caldwell was facing his own crisis. The decision to fire Michael had proved disastrous for the network's reputation. In a tense meeting with the board of directors, Caldwell announced, "We will offer every possible support to Michael's defense. If we made a mistake, we should correct it." As the case progressed, new complications arose. The prosecution presented emails allegedly exchanged between Michael and prominent political figures, suggesting illicit dealings. Ethan, however, was convinced that they were sophisticated forgeries. "We need an expert in digital forensics," Ethan told Michael during a visit. "Someone who can prove that these emails were fabricated." Michael nodded, his determination unwavering. "Do whatever it takes, Ethan. I'm not going to plead guilty to crimes I didn't commit." The weeks turned into months, and the Reeves case became a turning point in the discussion about press freedom and journalistic responsibility. Heated debates took place in universities, newsrooms, and Congress. The Reeves case forces us to re-examine the delicate balance between national security and freedom of the press, declared Senator Eleanor Hayes at a session of the Judiciary Committee. "We cannot allow the search for truth to be criminalized." Meanwhile, Michael struggled to maintain his sanity and his hope. The nights were long, filled with doubts and fears, but every morning he remembered why he was fighting. It wasn't just for him, but for every journalist who dared to challenge power in search of the truth. One rainy afternoon, Ethan arrived at Michael's office with a cautious smile. "We've got something, Mike. Our digital forensics team has found inconsistencies in the email metadata. It's subtle, but it could be the break we need." Michael felt a surge of hope, but knew the road was still long. "It's a start, Ethan, but we know they won't give up easily." As the trial approached, the tension in the city was palpable. The Reeves case had become a symbol of the fight for truth in an age of misinformation and manipulation. For many, the outcome of this trial would not only determine the fate of one man, but the future of investigative journalism in the United States. Michael Reeves, sitting in his apartment, looked out of the window at the city he loved so much. He knew that the next few days would be the hardest of his life. But he also knew that, no matter the outcome, the fight for the truth would continue. And he would be on the front line, with or without handcuffs. The sun was setting over New York, casting long shadows on the skyscrapers. Somewhere in that concrete jungle, the truth was waiting to be discovered, and Michael Reeves was determined to find it, no matter what the cost. The Global News Network building, once a symbol of reliable journalism, now looked like a besieged fortress. Reporters from other stations flocked to the entrance, eager for any crumb of information about the Reeves case and its effects on the network. On the 30th floor, Robert Caldwell, CEO of GNN, stared at the Manhattan landscape through his living room window. The weight of the last few weeks was visible in his stooped shoulders and tired eyes. A knock on the door interrupted his gloomy thoughts. "Come in," he said, turning to see Sarah Thompson, the investigations editor, enter with a stack of papers. "Bob, we have a problem," Sarah began, her voice tense. "The audience figures for the last month are the worst in a decade." Caldwell sighed heavily, sinking into his chair. "How bad?" "A 35% drop in prime time. Social networks are buzzing, with Boycott GNN trending for days." The silence that followed was deafening. Years of reputation building seemed to crumble before their eyes. Meanwhile, in the main studio, Jessica Lawson was preparing for another edition of the GNN Evening News. The atmosphere behind the scenes was tense, with members of the team exchanging nervous glances. "We're on air in 60 seconds, announced the director. Jessica took a deep breath, adjusting her microphone. She knew that every word she said would be scrutinized, not only by viewers, but by fellow professionals and media critics. "Good evening, America," she began, her voice steady despite the tension evident in her eyes. "Today, marks the 30th day since the arrest of our colleague Michael Reeves. Tonight, we'll examine not only the recent developments in his case, but also the broader implications for journalism and for this network. In homes across the country, reactions were mixed. Some loyal viewers stayed tuned, waiting for answers. Others, suspicious, changed the channel or turned to alternative news sources. In a bar in Brooklyn, a group of journalists watched the broadcast, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern and skepticism. "How can we trust them now?" muttered one young reporter. "If they threw Reeves to the wolves, who's to say they won't do the same to any of us?" In the GNN newsroom, the mood wasn't much different. Reporters and producers worked in silence, the shadow of uncertainty hanging over every editorial decision. Tom Hansen, the executive producer, gathered his team together. "Guys, I know we're going through difficult times, but we can't let that affect our work. We have a responsibility to our audience." A young producer, Lisa Chen, raised her hand shyly. "Tom, how can we be sure we're doing the right thing? After what happened to Mike?" Tom hesitated for a moment. "Lisa, what happened to Mike?" "Well, it reminds us of the importance of what we do. We have to be more vigilant, more committed to the truth than ever before." Meanwhile, on social media, the debate continued to rage. Hashtags such as JudgeGNN credibility and Jacha truth in media dominated the trends. Media analysts and influencers were incessantly debating the future of journalism in the age of disinformation. At the headquarters of the Association of Investigative Journalists, an emergency meeting was underway. Veterans of the profession were discussing the implications of the Reeves case for the entire industry. "This isn't just about GNN or Reeves," argued Diana Patel, an award-winning journalist. "It's about the public's trust in the Fourth Estate. If we lose that, we lose everything." Back at GNN, Caldwell called a meeting with the board of directors. The conference room was tense, with nervous executives awaiting his words. "Ladies and gentlemen," Caldwell began, his voice tired but determined, "we are facing the greatest crisis in our history. But we also have a unique opportunity." He paused, looking at every face in the room. "We can use this as a catalyst for change. To be better, more transparent, more committed to the truth than ever before." The next few hours were intense, with heated discussions about journalistic ethics, corporate responsibility, and the future of the web. In the end, a plan began to take shape: a full internal audit, the creation of an independent ethics board, and a public commitment to transparency. As the sun set over New York, Jessica Lawson prepared for a special announcement. The cameras turned on, and she looked straight into the lens, her face a mixture of seriousness and hope. "Good evening, America. Tonight, Global News Network makes a promise to you, our viewers. A promise of change, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to the truth." In homes, bars, and offices across the country, people watched, some skeptical, others hopeful. The road to regaining trust would be long and difficult, but it was a road that GNN was determined to travel. Meanwhile, in his cell, Michael Reeves listened to the announcement on a small radio. A sad smile played on his lips. Maybe, he thought, something good could come out of this whole ordeal. Maybe this was the jolt American journalism needed. The night was drawing in, and with it, the promise of a new dawn for journalism. The battle for truth and public trust was far from over, but the first step had been taken. And at GNN, in newsrooms across the country, and in the minds of journalists and viewers, a flame of hope was beginning to shine again. The sun was rising over Washington, D.C., illuminating the imposing National Press Club building. Inside, A conference room was packed with journalists, lawyers, and human rights activists. The atmosphere was tense, charged with urgency and concern. Diana Patel, the renowned investigative journalist, took to the podium. Her normally serene face was marked by determination. "Colleagues, friends, defenders of the truth," she began, her voice echoing through the silent room. "We are here today because freedom of the press, the fundamental pillar of our democracy, is under attack." A murmur of agreement ran through the audience. Diana continued, "The case of Michael Reeves is not just about one journalist. It's about all of us. It's about the public's right to know the truth and our duty to tell it, no matter what the consequences." Diana's words resonated deeply. Many in the room had felt the growing weight of self-censorship, the subtle fear that was beginning to permeate the country's newsrooms. In New York, at the headquarters of the Global News Network, Robert Caldwell was watching the live broadcast of the conference. His face was tense, reflecting the internal conflict between journalistic duty and the corporate pressures that had led to Reeves' dismissal. "Freedom of the press is essential for an informed and engaged society," Diana continued. "When the media has the autonomy to investigate and disseminate information, the public has access to a variety of perspectives and opinions." Meanwhile, in a small meeting room in Washington, a group of senators were discussing the possibility of new legislation to protect investigative journalists. "We cannot allow fear to silence the truth," argued Senator Eleanor Hayes. "We need laws that guarantee the safety and integrity of journalists." Back at the conference, Diana addressed the growing threats faced by journalists. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, press freedom is still not a reality. Journalists and media professionals face threats, intimidation, and violence in their daily work. On social media, the hashtag #DefendTruth went viral, with millions of citizens expressing their support for press freedom and demanding the release of Michael Reeves. In his cell, Michael listened to the news on the radio, a mixture of emotions on his face. Pride at the movement his case had sparked, but also concern for the future of the journalism he loved so much. Diana concluded her speech with an impassioned plea. "Freedom of the press is not a luxury. It is a necessity for a healthy democracy. When journalists are threatened, attacked, censored, or imprisoned, it is a direct attack on the freedom of expression of an entire society." Diana's final words were greeted with a standing ovation. The conference had become a battle cry, a call to action to protect not only Michael Reeves, but the very concept of a free press. In the days that followed, the movement gained momentum. Journalists across the country began wearing brooches with the inscription, "I am Michael Reeves," symbolizing the unity of the journalistic class. Robert Caldwell, inspired by the movement, called an emergency meeting at GNN. "We made a mistake," he admitted to his stunned staff. "It's time we put this right and position ourselves on the right side of history." GNN publicly announced its support for Michael Reeves and committed to a series of internal reforms to ensure journalistic integrity. Meanwhile, Michael's case continued to unfold in the courts. His lawyer, Ethan Winters, argued tirelessly about the importance of press freedom for democracy. "A free press is the guardian of truth," Ethan declared before the judge. "Without it, our democracy is in danger." As the debate on press freedom took to the streets, classrooms, and corridors of power, it became clear that the Michael Reeves case had become a turning point. The fight for truth and freedom of expression was far from over, but one thing was certain: the spirit of free and courageous journalism that Michael had always defended was more alive than ever. And as long as that spirit endured, there was hope for American democracy. The federal court for the Southern District of New York was packed that Wednesday morning. Journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens crowded the halls, all anxiously awaiting the verdict in the case of Michael Reeves. Outside, a crowd gathered, holding placards in support of the journalist and freedom of the press. Michael entered the courtroom, escorted by guards, but with his head held high. His eyes met those of Ethan Winters, his lawyer, who nodded confidently. The weeks of preparation, the sleepless nights examining evidence and building his defense, were all leading up to this moment. Judge Arthur Holloway entered the room, instantly silencing the hubbub. "All rise," announced the bailiff. "In the case of the United States versus Michael Reeves," Judge Holloway began, his deep voice echoing through the room, "the jury has reached a verdict." The silence was palpable. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, remembering everything that had brought him to this point. The courageous investigations, the veiled threats, the unjust dismissal, and finally, the arrest that shocked the nation. As for the charge of financial crimes, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. A collective sigh went through the room. On the charge of corruption, the jury finds the defendant not guilty. The room erupted in applause and shouts of joy. Michael felt his legs go weak, the tension of months finally dissipating. Ethan hugged him, tears in both their eyes. "Order in the court!" shouted Judge Holloway, banging his gavel. When silence returned, the judge continued, "Mr. Reeves, you are free to go. This court recognizes that the charges against you were unfounded and possibly motivated by interests seeking to silence investigative journalism." Outside, the news spread like wildfire. Social networks exploded with hashtags celebrating the victory. Reeves Livre, victory of truth. Journalism wins. At GNN headquarters, Robert Caldwell watched the live broadcast, a mixture of relief and shame on his face. He knew he had a lot to do to correct the mistakes of the past. Hours later, at an impromptu press conference on the steps of the courthouse, a visibly emotional but determined Michael Reeves addressed the crowd of reporters and supporters. "Today, it's not just a victory for me. It's a victory for every journalist who refuses to bow to threats and pressure. It's a victory for the truth and for the public's right to be informed." He paused, looking at the anxious faces in front of him. "But our fight doesn't end here. This case has exposed the weaknesses in our system, the pressures that journalists face on a daily basis. It's time for real change." In the days that followed, the Reeves case catalyzed a series of transformations in the American journalistic landscape. 1. GNN announced a complete restructuring, including the creation of an independent ethics committee to oversee its journalistic practices. Robert Caldwell, in a surprising move, offered his resignation, which was accepted by the board. 2. Congress began hearings to discuss new legislation to protect investigative journalists, dubbed the Reeves Act. 3. A coalition of media organizations launched a fund to support journalists facing legal persecution for their work. 4. Universities across the country have revised their journalism curricula, emphasizing the importance of ethics and courage in the profession. Michael Reeves, now a symbol of journalistic resistance, received numerous invitations for talks and interviews, but he had other plans. One sunny afternoon, Michael met with a select group of veteran and novice journalists in a discreet cafe in Brooklyn. "We're here to launch something new," he announced, his eyes glowing with the familiar flame of determination. "An independent investigative journalism collective. No corporate pressure, no fear of retaliation, just the relentless pursuit of the truth." Among those present was Jessica Lawson, who had left GNN to join the new venture. "What are we going to call it?" she asked. Michael smiled. "The Phoenix Press, because like the phoenix, true journalism always rises from the ashes, stronger and more determined." As the group animatedly discussed the details of the new project, Michael looked out of the cafe window, observing the city that never sleeps. He knew that the challenges ahead would be enormous, but he also knew that he was not alone in this fight. The sun was setting over New York, casting a golden glow over the skyscrapers. For Michael Reeves, and for American journalism, it was the beginning of a new chapter. a chapter of courage, integrity, and above all, the relentless pursuit of the truth. And so, with renewed determination and the support of a united community, Michael Reeves and his colleagues prepared to face the future, ready to tell the stories that needed to be told, no matter the cost. Journalism, they knew, was more than a profession. It was a vocation, a calling to illuminate the shadows and give voice to the silenced. Phoenix Press was about to take flight, and with it, the hopes of free, courageous, and truthful journalism. The sun was setting over New York, casting long shadows on the skyscrapers that dotted the skyline. At the Phoenix Press headquarters, the office was buzzing with activity. Journalists, new and old, were working tirelessly, the sound of keyboards and animated conversations filling the air. Michael Reeves stood in front of the panoramic window, watching the city that never sleeps. His eyes, once tired and apprehensive, now shone with renewed determination. He turned to face the room, a discreet smile playing on his lips. "Everyone," he called out, his calm but firm voice cutting through the buzz of the office. All eyes turned to him. A year ago, many thought that our work was over, that the truth could be silenced with handcuffs and false accusations. A murmur of agreement ran through the room. Jessica Lawson, now editor-in-chief of Phoenix Press, stepped forward, nodding encouragingly. "But look at us now," Michael continued, gesturing to the packed room. "Phoenix Press is not just a name. It's a symbol of the power of truth, of the resilience of authentic journalism." He paused, his eyes scanning the attentive faces around him. Faces of journalists who had risked everything for the truth, who had chosen integrity over convenience. "What happened to me," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength, "was not the end. It was a beginning, a wake-up call, to remind the world that journalism isn't about sensationalist headlines or ratings. It's about illuminating the shadows, giving voice to the silenced, and keeping power in check." Jessica moved closer, placing a comforting hand on Michael's shoulder. "And that's exactly what you've been doing, Shibi. Das ist die Kais. Always at this decida. Our investigations over the last few months have exposed corruption, brought justice, and changed lives." Michael nodded, a glint of pride in his eyes. "But our journey is far from over. Every story we tell, every truth we reveal, is a step towards a fairer, more transparent world." He turned back to the window, watching the city lights begin to flicker in the growing gloom. Out there are stories waiting to be told, truths eager to be discovered. And we, my friends, are the guardians of those truths. A reverent silence fell over the room. Each journalist present felt the weight and honor of their mission. "So," Michael concluded, turning to face his team one last time, "let's get on with our work. Let's remind the world why journalism matters. Because the truth, no matter how inconvenient or dangerous, will always find a way into the light." With those words, the room erupted in applause and shouts of approval. The energy was palpable, a mixture of determination and hope. As night fell over New York, Phoenix Press buzzed with renewed activity. Stories were being written, truths were being unearthed. And, at the center of it all, was Michael Reeves, no longer a symbol of persecution, but a beacon of hope for the future of journalism. Outside, the city pulsed with millions of untold stories, and inside that office, a dedicated group of journalists were ready to tell them, no matter the cost, because they knew that in the end, the truth would always prevail. And so, Phoenix Press continued its mission, a living testimony to the enduring power of truth and journalistic courage. The echo of their stories would reverberate far beyond those walls, shaping the future of a nation and reminding the world of the true meaning of a free and fearless press. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.